I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We continue in the Doctrine and Covenants. Our last reading was section 130. That was April of 1843 in Ramus, Illinois, and a lot of good doctrine there, a lot of good stuff. We will now be reading section 131, which is a little over a month later. Now, during this month, John C. Bennett, who has been planning his book Exposing Mormonism, is now on a lecture tour of the East, lying about Joseph Smith and the church. And Joseph Smith gets word of this. He's not just lying about Joseph Smith, he's claiming, like he said, Orson Pratt was planning on leaving the church and exposing all of its evil. Orson Pratt then has to publish a denial of this in the papers in Nauvoo. I believe they send a copy out east. Whether it's published or not, I'm not sure. But he makes accusations and claims about many people, many leaders of the church, and they're all trying to reassure the saints that none of it's true. The other important thing that does happen at this time is the Kinderhook plates. These are 6 copper plates, or copper, some kind of copper alloy, that are dug up in the town of Kinderhook. Somebody's digging up a mound. They find a large skeleton, and laying on the breast of the skeleton, they find these 6 copper plates. They are brought to Joseph Smith to be translated. Joseph Smith does say that he looked at them, and a preliminary look at the characters on these plates. He does give that it tells the history of the man that was buried, being a descendant of Ham, and kind of giving his genealogy. Now, the Kinderhook plates are great controversy in the church. I'm not going to get into details on them now. You can look up other videos about them. My opinion is still out. I'm not sure. I think there are reasons to believe that the Kinderhook plates are genuine and that Joseph Smith just never got the chance to actually translate them. We just got a brief glance at them. But, 36 years later, one of the men involved in finding them did claim that they were a fraud meant to expose Joseph Smith, but as B.H. Roberts points out, it seems kind of odd that they wouldn't have revealed the fraud back in the 1840s when it could have actually had an effect on things. You had a claimed conspiracy of between 3 or 4 men that is being exposed by one of them 36 years later for no apparent reason. It's all a little bit hazy, a little bit wishy-washy. I believe they say they found the Kinderhook plates in more modern times and have run tests on them and still claim that they're all fake. My opinion is I don't know. Whether it's true or not doesn't bother. Either way has no effect on me. It doesn't bother me in any way. But that's the main thing that happens during this month between sections 130 and 131. So let us look at 131. This is a very famous section. The heading states, Instructions given by Joseph Smith the prophet, given at Ramus, Illinois, May 16th and 17th, 1843. Recorded in History of the Church, Volume 5, pages 392 to 393. Now, given on the 16th and the 17th. The reason for this is because they were actually given 3 different messages here. Our first one, which is verses 1 through 4, is a personal message to William Clayton. See, they were in Ramus back in April, of course, for section 130. They went back to Nauvoo, they did some business. They are now visiting Ramus again. William Clayton is with them. There are the Johnsons here. I believe they're staying with the Johnsons. And just before retiring for the night, before going to sleep, Joseph Smith takes William Clayton by the hand and gives him this message, which is verses 1 through 4. The next day, they all go for a pleasure drive through the countryside, and they stop off in the grove in Ramus, and then Joseph gets up and preaches a sermon based on 2 Peter chapter 1, and this is verses 5 and 6. This is in the late morning on the 17th. In that afternoon, they are again continuing their pleasure drive through the countryside, and they stop off to listen to a Methodist preacher preaching his sermon. When he is done with his sermon, Joseph Smith then states that he corrects this Methodist preacher, and this is verses 7 and 8. Now, it's a little hazy in Joseph Smith's account whether he is correcting him publicly or just correcting him to the saints who are traveling with him. So they stop, they listen to the Methodist preacher, and then Joseph Smith, as they continue their drive, says, well, let me tell you where he was wrong. Or does Joseph Smith stand up and say, well, this is what it really is, and kind of counters the Methodist preacher? I think it's probably the former. He's probably talking only to the saints and telling them why the Methodist preacher is wrong. Because Joseph Smith wasn't a confrontational or rude kind of guy. And so it's doubtful that he would have just stood up and started preaching in public to correct somebody else. But it is still a little bit hazy in the in the history that he wrote exactly how that went down. So now we are going to read section 131. But this time, I am going to split it up into these 3 sections. So we're going to read a little bit at a time. It's a very short section, only 8 verses, but we're going to read it in 3 parts. So, first, verses 1 through 4. In the celestial glory, there are 3 heavens or degrees, and in order to obtain the highest, a man must enter into this order of the priesthood, meaning the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. And if he does not, he cannot obtain it. He may enter into the other, but this is the end of his kingdom. He cannot have an increase. Now, this is the message given to William Clayton. Now, this is only part of the message. He said a fair amount more. This is probably 1/4 to 1/3 of what Joseph Smith actually told William. And in the beginning of the message, he told him, you are good. You are married. Your marriage is sealed. Your salvation is sure as long as you don't commit the unpardonable sin. Then that sealing has sealed you to your exaltation. And then he makes the statement, in order to reach this exaltation, you have to be married. So he's saying, you're married, you're sealed in that marriage, and that is the requirement for exaltation. Now, there will be those in the celestial kingdom who are not married, but there will be nobody who is exalted who is not married. And those who do not attain exaltation, even if they make it to the celestial kingdom, even if they were married on the earth, if they are not exalted, they are not married in heaven. Verses 5 and 6. The more sure word of prophecy means a man's knowing that he is sealed up unto eternal life by revelation and the spirit of prophecy through the power of the holy priesthood. It is impossible for a man to be saved in ignorance. In 2 Peter, Peter writes about the more sure word of prophecy. We have a more sure word of prophecy. And what this is, as Joseph says, this is knowing. It is revealed to you by God that you are sealed up to eternal life, that you will be exalted. That's what the more sure word of prophecy is. You can't be saved in ignorance. You can't be saved unless you know you are saved. Now, does this mean that if we don't get this direct revelation from God, that we can't be exalted? I don't think so. Because we can receive that knowledge before being resurrected. After we die and are in the spirit world, we can receive that knowledge. We receive that more sure word of prophecy in the spirit world before the resurrection. But if we don't receive it before being resurrected, then we're not exalted. Whether it's in this life or in the spirit world, it has to be before resurrection. Because once you are resurrected, that means you are glorified in the glory you will have. And you can't change glory after being resurrected. So it has to come before resurrection, but I don't think it has to come in this life. I think it just has to come before resurrection, which could be in the next life, in the spirit world. But now let us read 7 and 8. There is no such thing as immaterial matter. All spirit is matter, but it is more fine or pure, and can only be discerned by purer eyes. We cannot see it, but when our bodies are purified, we shall see that it is all matter. Now this is a glorious doctrine, quite honestly. But I've recently come across some people who claim that if it's matter, then it has to be subject to physical laws. And they base this on a modern definition of matter. That matter has space, and matter occupies space, has mass, all this stuff. A very physical description. But not all matter is physical. Some matter is spiritual. There are two, and I can't remember what section it is now, but there's a section that talks about, spirit and element inseparably joined has a fullness of joy. And so when we're reading the scriptures, there are two classes of matter, and we call them the spirit and the element. The spirit is governed by spiritual laws. The element is governed by physical or natural laws. The spirit is not subject to gravity, but the element is. But it is in the spirit that we have agency. That is where our agency is. The law of agency is a spiritual law, and therefore the spirit is subject to agency. Now, some laws apply to both, such as cause and effect. These things, but if it wasn't matter, it wouldn't exist. And I also note that at the time of Joseph Smith writing this in 1843, the definition of matter included things like electricity, magnetism. So you had solid, liquid, and gas, but then you had, well, the gas was called aeriform, and then you had what was called the imponderables, the ones that you couldn't grasp directly through the physical body. And they included electricity, magnetism, light. These things, they have no weight, they have no mass, but they are still considered matter. And so spirit is just another kind of matter. And as it says here, we can't see it. We have no way of directly perceiving or detecting spirit matter. It is a spiritual thing. But I'm going to leave that there. And section 132 is next. And that one's going to dive into some deep controversies, but it is between 132 and section 88. Those are my two favorite sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. So I will see you there.